Alright, I'm going to do a quick example of a tube and gusset structure that you can kind of play with your CAD class. In a sketch, I'm just going to try to start making some shapes with some tubing. Let's say I have a structure that requires two vertical tubes that are connected at the top. Let's say there's also let's say this is like a conveyor tower situation where you have a conveyor going into the robot and then a tower going up to some sort of mechanism, kind of like the 2022 shooter tower situation. I'm going to define the inch, the end of the tube as an inch, because I'm going to assume that I'm using 1 by 1. I'm using an equality constraint to lock in all of those tube structures. I'm going to give it an approximate height of 15 inches just to give it some height. Let's say I know I need 10 inches between the verticals for the game piece. Use that same 10 inch for the conveyor kind of horizontal travel. And then I'm going to put 27, just kind of an approximate length of a robot front to back. Then I'm going to lock it in place using incidence constraint with the origin. And I'm going to put everything on top of another rail that I'm going to connect from front to back. And let's say that's going to be a 2 by 1, so I'm going to make this dimension at 2. So now I have a fully constrained drawing of some tubes that I can use as a base for my tube and gusset practice. And then I'm going to rename that sketch. I'm going to just call it conveyor sketch. And on top of this, I could start making my tubes. Now I'm going to create a plane based off of the right plane. I'm going to move it about the width I think I would need it on a robot. So right now I'm doing a little bit of math trying to figure out, like, do I want it to be a 22-inch wide total thing? I think that's a bit too wide, so I'm going to go a little bit smaller. I'm going to do 12 divided by 2. So that means left to right side, there's going to be 12 inches between the outer rails of my tubes. So now I'm going to draw rectangles, and you'll see here as I'm doing my rectangle, all I'm doing is constraining it to the sketch that's already there, extruding it an inch. So now I have my 2 by 1. I'm going to use the tube converter tool, click that, and it's going to just automatically create that into a pre-drilled tube. So that's the first tube created. Now I'm going to do another sketch, and I'm going to create on the same plane. I'm going to do another rectangle using the incidence constraint again to lock everything together. Notice when I'm doing this, it makes it so that I don't have to use dimensions. All I need to know is that the dimensions of my main sketch are good, and the rest kind of follows. So again, forward and back vertical tubing there, and extrude those 1 inch. And then I'm going to realize, oh, they're in the wrong direction, so I'm going to flip those. And then same thing, tube converter, front and back. So now I have my long tube and then my vertical tube. That 10-inch tube in the back is going to be the same tube I use for the horizontal part of the forward section of the tower. So last tube I need to make is this kind of horizontal part of the conveyor. So I am looking, and it seems that this black line shows that it's constrained somewhere. I'm trying to figure out where it's constrained. So what I'm going to do is actually delete a part of the rectangle to see what unlocks when I do that. So what I'm going to do in just a second is realize, let's take that away. That part moves, that part doesn't. So actually on that bottom left corner, there is a horizontal constraint that made it so that it couldn't move. So now that that's taken care of, recreate that line, use my incident constraints again to create that last tube, extrude it out. It's going to be a 1 by 1 again, and then same thing to convert it so that it's a tube. So those are all of the individual tubes needed to create my assembly. Now I'm going to rename them just so that everything's clear. That one's going to be a mounting rail at the bottom. Then I'm going to have a forward vertical rail. I'm going to have a back vertical, and then I'm going to do a horizontal. I'm going to call it conveyor horizontal. Just make it a little more descriptive. Now, if your team does like part numbers or stuff like that, you could also rename them based on part numbers too, just however makes sense to name them. This is just going to be easier for putting together this assembly. I'm going to drop everything in, and then I'm going to actually fix the mounting rail tube so that everything kind of gets constrained to that. So I don't really know where the fix tube is, but I'm going to right click and then do fix tool there. So now that bottom piece is not going to move. So now I'm going to use fasten mates. Wrong one. I'm going to do a fasten mate between the mounting rail and that forward rail. And then same thing, I'm going to do another fasten mate from the mounting rail to the back rail. So now those shouldn't move at all. Conveyor rail to the back mounting rail. That's constrained. And now I'm going to add another one of these vertical rails. So I'm trying to jiggle anything, see if anything moves. It doesn't. Add another vertical rail. And then I'm going to do the back vertical. I'm going to use that because that is going to be the same 10 inches that I need for the top of the tower. So I got all my parts in. I'm going to constrain it. So I need the that top corner to go along with the top corner of this. That's the wrong direction. This is the right direction here. Change the orientation. Boom. Good. Lock that in. Now same thing here. I need that direction to lock with that direction. Now we're good. Now that should be locked, and now we have our structural assembly put together for our conveyor and tower. Okay, so now how does this all get fixed together so it doesn't move on a robot? We're going to design some gussets. So I'm going to go back to my part studio. Everything's good. I filmed this before I did the voiceover, so I don't remember what I was trying to highlight here, but everything's in its place. Okay, so now I'm back in its sketch. I realize there's only two kind of gussets that I need. There's going to be a right angle gusset and a T-gusset. So I'm going to start making that right angle gusset based on this forward location here. I'm going to pick 3 on the vertical and 4 on the horizontal just because I think it looks pretty proportional in terms of the amount of surface area contact with the structure. I'm going to make my end circles here. Accidentally constraint that tangent to that circle, so I'm going to remove that constraint. And I'm just make them tangent to the tube. So these gussets are going to be the full width of that 1x1 tube. So the diameter of that circle should be 1 inch. Now I'm going to create these lines and I'm going to purposefully make them kind of off a little bit because I don't want there to be a wonky constraint that ties me to something, because I'm going to want to define the constraint myself. I'm going to do tangent constraints there, and then I did a 3-point arc in the middle. I'm going to do tangent constraints on that 3-point arc, and now I'm going to have to define the radius for the rest of that part. So I'm trying to find what a good radius looks like. I'm going to give it a dimension. I'll go with 1 at first. That looks too small, so I'm actually bump it out to 2. That looks pretty good. 1.5. I'm going to start removing some of these parts of the sketch because they're not needed, but I actually don't need to do this. You'll see in the next gusset that I don't do this, and it actually makes it easy for me because I lose some constraints here because some of those parts are now gone. So now I'm trying to reconstrain everything to see what moved. Those things need to be incident to the center of the circles. Boom, boom. And then try to see what's here. Okay, so that looks like that needs to be tangent and horizontal. That needs to be tangent. And then this one, not sure why that dot is blue, but there we go. Okay. Make that touching the line. That doesn't look good, so I'm going to remove that. I'm actually going to make it tangent. There we go. So now everything's locked in. I can extrude it, make sure it's a new part. I'm going to use 1/8 inch aluminum for this gusset. Bang, right angle corner gusset. Now I need to make a T-gusset. So I'm going to utilize the middle of this mounting rail as my T-gusset location. I'm going to go ahead and look at the distance just to make sure it works. It needs to work there and in that top spot. I checked and verified that's 1 inch from hole to hole, so I'm going to lock that in place. I need to have a circle here for all of my gusset locations. I'm going to do 5 holes at the bottom, make all of those equal to the actual hole of the tube itself too. And then I'm going to make that circle equal. I'm going to check that dimension. It's 1 inch. Check that dimension. It is also 1 inch. It's 1 inch. So that means that T-gusset should work for both of these locations. So I'm going to make that 1 inch. And then I also need that to be right over top, so I do a vertical constraint, and then I'm going to do a linear pattern in the vertical direction, 1/2 inch offset, and lock that in. So now, this time, instead of using a tangent like that to create my gusset that looks just a little bit wide, I'm actually going to define a diameter. So I'm going to remove those constraints because I don't like the way that looks. And you don't really need the gusset to be full width of that tube. So I'm going to actually make this 0.75. So I think that's a good surface area contact with the tube. And it makes a bit of a smaller gusset. So if weight's a concern or if space is a concern, like if the gusset starts interfering with something else, you can play with the dimensions. Got one straight line, tangent there, 3-point arc. Gonna do one side, lock it in place, tangent, tangent, and then I have to define a point. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make those 2 points horizontal from each other, and it gives us a nice kind of location there. And then I'm gonna mirror it to the other side, extrude it, and then make that another 1/8 inch gusset. And then I realize, oh, I accidentally added the part instead of creating a new one, so make sure that is new. Now that is a new gusset. I have now a right angle gusset, so that's a 90-degree gusset, and then I have a T gusset. Rename those parts as you go, that way you don't lose where things are. And then in my assembly, I'm going to import my 2 gussets. I need 2 of the T gussets, and then I need, I think, 5 of the right angle gussets. I'm going to put 4 in for now, and then now it's just all mating. So I think it's easier to mate based on the corner holes. So I'm just mounting those corner holes in the locations I need, flipping them around to the correct orientation. So I am able to create this assembly with the fewest number of parts, individual parts, and just copy and paste as needed in the assembly. So that's one thing to think about as you're doing your design is how many parts of these do you actually need. You can cut down on your CAD time if you first identify what parts are identical and just making the number of parts needed that are unique and just using them over and over again. So that's what I'm doing here. And now with that last mate, I realize I still need one more gusset. And so I'm going to copy this one, paste it, and then give it a fasten mate from the inside there to the outside there. Boom. And now I have a structure that's fully gusseted.